I would like to see those types of institutional frameworks develop to protect the consumer, where profit motive by the certifier is the key thing.
Okay, but let me make a point about that. This is the whole point of the talk this afternoon, which is that those systems, a market will emerge for those kinds of systems, but there has to be a conscious, organized effort to develop those markets. And my argument is that if you consciously work to develop those kind of markets, that would be the counterbalance to the political structure developing. And it really has to be done. It's a volitional, vigorous undertaking, as opposed to saying, "Gee, I wish it would happen." Because if we say, "I wish it would happen," government will move in on it.
So they have a problem. We have those. They have a monopoly on this information providing mechanism.
The government.
The government does. There's no sense of a group of us getting together trying to provide good consumer information because we can't compete against the government.
But there is a sense, and it's growing. That's the piece that's right there to be used, and that's the part I'm saying there's a place to overlap with.
I'd like to make 2 points, if I may. One is in relation to what we're just talking about here. These institutions, once set up by the government, usually rarely do what they're originally intended to do. And most often they gravitate to the control of those people who have the greatest interest in those institutions, which is typically the producers. Things like the ICC, which is going to be controlled by the transportation industry. Any sort of regulatory agency usually ends up in the hands of those who are being regulated. My second point is, there's, in response to the question of once you set up institutions to a government, how do you restrict them from getting out of hand? I think there's 2 parallel lines of thought that work together there. One is that the government is no better than the people who it represents. So if you don't have a constant, continuous respect for the value of liberty and the people that are being governed, that government will eventually lose its respect for liberty. Will do things which are in violation of liberty in the long run. The second approach is, so the answer to that, along those lines, is to have continuous education of people and constant vigilance, as John said. A second method is to set up a set of institutions like a Bill of Rights, as we have in our Constitution, which state the obvious, which to the founding fathers, the Bill of Rights was obvious and didn't seem to be necessary. It was almost absurd to write up, but they said, well, we better do it because of our experience with other governments. And as it has turned out, with the decline of respect for liberty in this country, the Bill of Rights has gradually been reinterpreted and abused, and to this day it's very effective, and it's really all that's left in our society between total government power and libertarianism. It's the Bill of Rights, which is respecting ensuring those freedoms which are left. So you need those 2 things to work together. You need a written set of assurances for rights, but those are only so good as only as valuable as the people who comprise the country that is ruled by that set of values. I think a libertarian state would probably have a very, very lengthy set of documents, probably written by somebody like Murray Rothbard over the course of 3 years. It would probably be a very well-defined set of rules, but even that would only be as good as long as the people live in those institutions respected them.
And it's because as long as the institutions that interpreted them in a way that was favorable. Let me kind of make first of all, on your first point, I want to make a general point. I don't believe that. I don't believe that the ICC gradually comes under the control of the railroads. I don't believe it comes into existence till the railroad wants it. And I think it's a really important distinction. That's the whole Coco thesis on regulating railroads. But I don't think that there's a regulatory agency over there that wasn't there only because the industry that wanted to be, that it was going to regulate needed it. That's what I meant when I said the FDA was operating as a referee between Florida and California oranges. I mean, the food industry itself decided in 1905 that it needed to have a regulatory agency. There were reasons why, but they decided they needed it, and that's when it came into being. For 30 years before that, the proposal had been lying around in Congress. National Canners endorsed it in 1905. 1 year later, it passed Congress, and it was in existence.
Who wanted the FTC?
The FTC, the whole financial community was in serious difficulty about the collapse of the economy every 10 years or so. And there was a lot of battling. There's always battling about what shape these are going to take. But the FTC and the Federal Reserve Board were born the same year, and it was part of the antitrust hearings that were carefully orchestrated by pro-business people. The anti-business wing of Congress was excluded from the antitrust hearings in 1913 and 14. And very conservative, money-managing congressmen came in, and what they wanted was a central banking function. And the FTC was a little tiny piece of that. I mean, it was just a little tiny tail on this great big restructuring
What
of
did
the
they
federal.
expect to get out of it, though?
The FTC?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a little bit of regulation over claims in the marketplace, and a little bit of antitrust regulation. Antitrust regulation is important to businessmen in relation to other businessmen. It's more important to businessmen in relation to people who are trying to take them over than it is to consumers to be protected from that. And but that basically the FTC had those two functions: control the claims of my competitors and make sure that he doesn't cover me up in an antitrust move. And they all basically said that. But that was a real small agency at that point, and it still is. I mean, it never really had much power, even in this last go around. But I think that they're born. I think they're born captured. And with regard to your other point, I think that we can think of the Bill of Rights and those things that have accompanied it as institutions. That's an institutionalization of principle, and it serves even as a written down thing. It serves as an institution. I would argue that the kinds of one of the beliefs that I think you would find rooted in the consumer movement is that the kinds of protections that individuals have against government built into the Bill of Rights should be and can be extended to other concentrations of power in society, such as corporations.
Now, I think we need to redefine force here, because I think that's the long discussion we had. My conclusion afterwards was that our confusion was the definition of force.
Our confusion?
Yes. Because I think we're talking about different things.
Okay.
Yeah, libertarians will tend to separate out
We're
contractual
talking about
transactions.
different things, different definitions of talking. We use the same word and a different definition for the same word. And that was a communication problem. And I think the key word is force. Because when you talk, and you're using a synonym here, power, and we would similarly define it. When libertarians talk about force or power, we are talking about physical force, fraud, which in a sense is a type of force, because in a fraud, someone has your property that they got under false pretenses, and they are keeping it from you by force. And the threat of force, threat of violence. Those are the kind of things that we mean by force, and those are the kind of things that we mean by power. When we talk about government power, we're talking about the power, the ability to get your way by using violence. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And when you say that corporations have power, you're talking about economic power. And to us, that's a different kind of power.
Well, now wait a minute. Okay, I think this is very important. The East India Company had its own army. The East India Company had its own army, and it conducted its own criminal trials, and it had its own executions. And it was under its commerce power that it did that. And I am telling you right now that J.P. Morgan ran an army through the Erie Railroad in the last part of the last century. And I'm saying to you that if you're telling me because he's a corporation it's all right for him to do that, then you got a problem.
No. Well, we define the force. We don't say who's using it. If the East India Company does those things, then they are using force.
Well, one of the things
But
that
when
big
you're talking
corporations
about-
do systematically by structure is to take things that they say they're going to give you and not give it to you and hold it away from you by their power.
Like what?
Well,
ITT shot the Chileans.
that's right.
Did the what?
Shot these people in Chile on their telephone.
Yeah, but that's force, and libertarians are against the initiation of force.
It's not a question of who exercises.
What I think we're confusing though.
Okay, but I want to make a point why this is, I think this is very important, and it's a crucial place where, we kept crossing in our last conversation. I think that the people that I am trying to summarize the views of, what I would call a consumerist, think that if you take any institution, government or not non-government, and accumulate the kinds of power in it that institutions like our current government and our current corporate world are accumulating in it, you're going to get force and fraud as one of the expressions of that concentration of power. And it's a serious problem if you want to draw a line and say, well, we'll fight the government but not the corporation.
Well, we're fighting anybody that initiates force.
Or fraud.
Now, right now.
Force or fraud. That's what you
Force, which to us includes fraud.
He said force and fraud.
Well, we say that because most people don't understand that libertarians mean fraud included in the definition of force. So we usually say force and fraud. Just
But see, my first question, or one of my second question was, do you recognize anything other than physical force? That's an important
Yeah, well, he
thing.
listed it.
No. Hey, I'm not talking about where you are as much as where you're understood to be by other people. And it's really important for me when I'm walking around in the world out there and somebody says, hey, do libertarians believe in fraud? And I say, well, they believe in force. And I got to make it clear that they...
I think possibly libertarians misrepresent themselves with the use of terminology here. This whole thing is continually coming back at us.
Yeah, I
again
know.
and again.
It's a real problem.
If we look at it in terms of results, regardless of whether it's force or fraud or whatever, if it violates human rights, we're against it.
And
But a corporation, simply by possessing a large amount of money, and it is said in the vernacular to have economic power. And to us, there is nothing wrong with that. If they commit fraud, there is something wrong. But it's not because they have millions of dollars, it's because they've committed fraud. If they have a private army and they shoot people, they are initiating force, and that is wrong.
Individuals have power. An individual who has a handgun has the power to kill. But we would not restrict the ownership of that handgun. We would provide some form of punishment or restitution ex post after the fact if that force has been
it wouldn't be
initiated.
after, but you'd have to have a
threat.
debate about when it's
When there's a threat.
Well, what I'm saying is, but the point is, the reason I ask those questions about government is that it seems to me that the tendency of government to accumulate a power through its taxing power, its ability to maximize the number of dollars it has to apply to the things it does, is intrinsically bound up with its tendency to engage in use of force as a threat and use of fraud.
It gives protection.
And I'm arguing that the same analogy's got to be looked at for a concentration of power that is a non-government concentration of power that's got an inflow of a lot of dollars, which for all intents and purposes are like taxes when they are going into a concentrated monopolized marketplace. In fact, you listed monopolized as one of the aggressions.
I guess we look at how monopoly occurs. We view what we would consider to be efficient monopoly. I think probably Eastman Kodak, maybe to some degree, is a large corporation that's gained its monopolistic position because it produces good products at lower prices, as compared to the trucking industry, which has gained some of its monopolistic power, or AT&T, which has gained some of its monopolistic power through government licensing and regulation. To me, the way you keep that power down is a competitive market. That as corporations begin to, in fact, engage in that power and turning it into a force, the marketplace will be, hopefully, that's what libertarians are concerned about, will begin to take that power away as long as they have the voluntary choice to be able to consume someplace else, which they don't right now. I can't hire a trucker to take my furniture someplace. I can't get a different telephone system. So I have no option when the local utility tells me my rates are going up or they're going to do something to my service, it's like it or lump it. I don't have that option of shopping the competition, which then I think would reduce the threat of the type of power we're all concerned about.
But you see, that whole argument that you just made is the heart of the argument of consumerism. I mean, that's the whole point of having people out there arguing that the consumer needs to have choices.
But see, most of us, I think, interpret consumerism as paternalism. That we want to protect somebody from unsafe lawnmowers, we want to protect somebody from taking Laetrile, that we want to protect people from their own irrationality or their own decision-making process. I think that's the general interpretation of consumerism.
Well, I think that is not an unfair interpretation of some of the interpretation of what has been done. But it has been a very strong thrust of a lot of consumer people that has kept lateral from being banned as much as it has. I guess it's really having trouble right now, but it's been done as a social policy question. I mean, I go around and say, look, I don't know. If you ask me to take lateral, I'd never take it. On the other hand, I certainly don't think there should be a law that keeps it out of the hands of a terminally ill cancer patient. I mean, that's ridiculous. And that argument's been made by me and other consumerists in the food and drug field. And it's an important point. Now, the issue of how somebody gets their monopoly power, I think could be, is open to being analyzed on a case-by-case basis. That is, I think the debate that would go on between consumers who wanted more restriction of a monopoly versus those who wanted less, who wanted to leave it more to the marketplace, would be a one of ascertaining whether they engaged in what you call force or fraud. I mean, I sit down and I can point to it, I can say, look, this is a bad thing, and I think it's a bad thing, and everybody else thinks it's a bad thing, then we will be against it. And it does not necessarily mean when I make my structure argument, I'm saying I suspect and I argue that those bad things are going to follow, by and large, that structure. But I'm not going to say, just because there's a large structure, let's do something bad to the large structure. What I am going to say is, you watch that structure, it's going to get you, just the way you would say, you watch government and it's going to get you. And I just want to, my argument was, I want to make sure that that parallel is not lost in the libertarian discussion.
I'm really just listening right now. I'm hearing confusion in the sense that you're saying, excuse me, but what do libertarians who quote believe? So that when I leave here, I can talk to my consumer group and sort of say, well, okay, this is what they believe, okay? It's like if you asked a Republican, if you went to the meeting of this, what do Republicans believe, what do Democrats believe, or what do Christians believe, or what do Jews believe? It isn't what you're trying to define words. One thing that I think will view, and what I'm listening to, and the people that are in this room that you're trying to get to learn about believe in only one thing, and that's freedom. And I think we all, whether it's in one word or another, have felt we've lost a lot of freedoms. The first person we look to, of course, is the government. They have the government. They, half of us work, many work for the government, so they are we. Whether you're in a teaching job and it happens to be in a city school district, you work for the government. So they are we, and it's a matter of constraints of freedom is something that we're all getting concerned about. Whether the freedom is working at Kodak, and Kodak says you have to wear a tie, or you can't work here, or you must wear stockings. This is the point I think we're all here about. Now, whether it's one word or another, and this is what I'm trying to me, I'm hearing fighting over semantics rather than a concept. And I don't know how you can end that.
Hopefully redefining terms on common ground. I think it's been a problem with a lot of libertarians and discussing things with other people is that we all have different definitions of the same concept, and when we say, the last speaker, the concept.
Yeah, we have to use the same definitions of words or we can't communicate.
Well, except that I think that the point that she just made is really a very clarifying point if you went to the world with it. See, what I'm worried about is a movement that goes out and says, boy, if the government tells me that I can't wear a tie, I'm really mad about it, but I'm perfectly happy if Kodak tells me that I can't wear a tie. And if that's what the movement's all about, I got a real problem with it.
No, what we are about is the proper response if you don't like that.
If you don't like what?
If you don't like either one of those organizations telling you that you have to wear a tie. If the government tells you have to wear a tie and uses force to make you wear a tie, whether you want to or not, that to us is a very bad thing. It's something that we are entitled to defend ourselves against by whatever necessary means. But on the other hand, if Kodak says wear a tie, that is within their right to make that a condition of employment. Now, you have a right as an employee, if you don't like that rule, to complain about it, to have organize protest demonstrations out in front, to organize a union, to go on strike, or to personally quit, to write letters to the editor of the newspaper and say what a lousy company this is, they're making me wear a tie. You know, you have a right to do all of those things, but you don't have the right to use force to defend yourself against Kodak.
As long as Kodak is not a monopoly, guaranteed monopoly power by
Yes.
government.
Yeah, if they're in essence using the power of government, then as far as we're concerned, it would be that they would be initiating force, and then you would have the right to retaliate. See, what we're concerned about is what you have a right to do, and if you don't like what IT&T is doing, you can protest, and you can burn them in effigy, and you can do all kinds of things like that. But you don't have a right to to storm the ITT building in self-defense.
I hate to disagree with you, but I was in South America working for ITT. Those people did not have that opportunity at all. They are
To what?
protests or.
Oh, no, I'm talking right.
Yeah, we're saying that they don't. I think the problem is it's a dual problem. You've got monopoly sanctioned by government, and therefore people who are forced into doing certain things don't have the option of going elsewhere, either to work or to buy
In
products.
South America, you would be entitled to
I think there's a distinction to be made here.
Oh, good, another distinction.
Yeah, you may be thinking of libertarians as being capitalists, and libertarians do not support capitalism per se. They support laissez-faire or the free market. Now, capitalism today has come to mean state capitalism. Actually, is what we're actually living under, where the government is as much involved in business as private individuals are. And we are not capitalists in the sense that we support big corporations. We aren't defending the corporations. We're defending their rights, or anybody's right for that matter, to participate in the free market and do as they choose, so long as they don't commit fraud against their customers.
But what do you mean by a free market, though, in that
The free market is a market in which you have the right to produce any product or to buy any product that you so choose, as long as you don't do anything to violate the rights of others, that is, to commit force or fraud against others. Period. You can do anything you like. You can sell dangerous drugs if the individuals are aware that they're buying dangerous drugs, or you can.
Well, okay, but suppose that you don't tell them.
If you don't tell them, that's fraud.
Okay. There's the FTC.
Just let them.
You just created the
You don't need a
FTC.
regulatory agency to do that.
Why not?
You have a court system. The libertarian ideal is that a court system can enforce violations of personal rights without unnecessary.
Okay, take away the FTC, you got a court system, now you've got government doing it.
They're both government. There's a distinction, though, that a regulatory agency prevents people from doing things before the fact.
No, that's not true. That just happens to be an anomaly of the last 10 years. And it's you could have a regulatory agency process that was created and never acted except after the fact. In fact, that's the way they did it for years.
You can't do that, but that is, in that case,
would be acting as a court.
displacing the courts. The courts could do that as well.
That's what regulatory
One thing
agencies
they can
are.
do that the courts cannot do is act before the fact. And that is
The court's gonna have to be before the fact too. A court, what do you mean? A court could go right now under the Food and Drug Act or the FTC Act and do any of the things that those agencies are doing under the current law. There's nothing intrinsic about a court that makes it different from a regulatory agency on those grounds.
I pose a question, do we have a free market system?
No.
No. Are you asking me? No, we don't have a free market system. That's where I have my problem with this.
Yeah, right, and the issue was raised, though, and I agree with you, in the sense that if I sold you a drug and I didn't tell you anything about it, I haven't committed fraud. In the sense that I think that it's to the consumer to secure information. I think this is where the institutional frameworks will develop, that as long as I don't claim that this drug will do something it won't do, or if you ask me a question, will it hurt me or will there be side effects? If I say I'm not sure, then I haven't committed fraud. If I say no, and in fact it does, then I've committed fraud. So I think, libertarian society, it would still be caveat emptor, and hopefully the institutions in the market structure would raise up to provide that information.
The market structure will act one other way to guarantee that things like dangerous drugs aren't being sold anyways. It's the obvious market mechanism that people always tend to overlook when they're making arguments about drug regulation. That a company that kills its customers is not going to be in business for long. It's precisely what some of these historical drugs have done.
Yeah, but a lot of companies that do that don't want to be in business very long. A lot of companies that do that do not want to be in business very long. I mean,
But that's
the little.
consumers' right to go to a company.
No, but I'm saying the little. First of all, I don't disagree with the basic position you're taking, but I just want to point out that the small trade organization that gets together and laces a bunch of heroin with rat poison and sends it out into New York City and makes $8 million instead of $1 million by doing that really doesn't care a whole hell of a lot whether those customers come back or not.
That's where the name brand becomes valuable. You recognize.
So they forge name brand, huh?
Yeah. Should the customer have the right to buy that, though, if he wants to? Should the customer have the right to buy from that company if the customer wants to?
You shouldn't have to buy.
Well, no, we're not talking about that, Alan. We're talking about what you tell a customer.
Okay, well,
No,
is it
we're
a fraud
agreement that
issue?
it's fraud and that it's a crime. What are you talking about? Is it fraud and it's a crime, and that the victim of this ought to be able to sue and get restitution? Now,
Well, let me give you an example on Lateral. I think there's a role for the FDA in the Lateral question. One of the big problems with the Lateral marketplace, and perhaps one of the reasons why all the results are so confusing about whether or not it works, is that probably something in the neighborhood of 40 to 60% of what is sold as Lateral isn't Lateral. It's other stuff. And a bunch of people have just come into that market, stamp Lateral on what they sell, and it's not Lateral. Now, it seems to me somewhere in there's the opportunity. Now, I think you could probably do an independent marketplace activity on this, and I think that would be a better way. I prefer that. But someone's got to tell people that that's not Lateral in those bottles.
And those who sold it under
That's a
the,
good point. Let's follow this up. Now, should not the American Medical Society, medical doctors have come up with that case? Obviously, they haven't. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, if underneath the definition you gave of libertarian, we are talking about using the right to defend ourselves, and obviously there is no marketplace. We have come to that conclusion, and obviously we are being assaulted. We've come to that conclusion. But yet you're telling me that the libertarianist position, you haven't told me. What is the libertarianist position underneath the assault? Recognized forceful assault that is being propagated today.
restitution, and I think there's a debate on punitive damages on top of it.
Well, after you take the Lateral and die, then you go to file suit.
Restitution. Restitution is what? The government prints money, where we got talking about.
Well,
No, I'm looking for a position.
I think if I look at the current legal system, right now, if coercion fraud is initiated against an individual and you're a victim of a crime, you not only get victimized once, you get victimized a second time. I.e., you have to support the criminal who victimized you. The libertarian approach to justice is to attempt, to the fullest degree possible, to seek restitution from the criminal. Monetarily, and there are certain items of crime, such as rape, that are non-quantifiable. You can't put a price on them. Yet when we have a simple automobile accident, we go to court and sue. We say things like, well, this is a lost income due to personal injury. The criminal, of course, either has to pay so much in compensation. We also limit the liability.
You're going to get restitution from the opposed or the oppressor.
As much as possible. As much as possible.
Transgressor or the people who don't back them up. Okay, you just gave a very good example of Lateral. Right, somebody sells aspirin as Lateral. Right, now the medical society knows this, and the medical society doesn't do anything about it. Okay, now to put the whole medical society in jail, or do we? Or again, our business is real estate. Okay, something done wrong in real estate, yet the real estate practices, which is the board, okay, doesn't say anything about it. Right? You put the whole board in jail. Okay, in the airlines where there are certain accidents, they don't bother talking about the fact that you put the whole group in jail. I mean, we're not talking about one individual causing this problem. It's not Joe Schmo who opened up a store and sold you a bad gun. Okay, we're talking about big individuals and big corporations.
And restitution is our money
The
recycling.
problem I'm running into is the real estate board is, due to real estate licensing required. The American Medical Association is there because of medical licensing requirements, and the FAA is there because of the government
Well, the
allocations.
way you talked, and I did a crime, you could not go in front of the jury, okay, talk for me, because I like the way you talk, and I think you could get me off, because you're not licensed as a lawyer.
Right.
All right? Now, even though this is what we're talking about, freedoms, where I want to use you, and I have the right to use you, I lose that right. So we have all these heavy groups out there that are, I think we're against, if you happen to believe in libertarianism, okay, any part of it. I've been trying to be polite.
Okay.
You mean the minority of the white? Is that-
Yeah. I think Alan didn't answer your question, and you led him off very easy when he used his analogy about Kodak. I would argue that there is no difference in the libertarian definition of fraud. If the government said you have to wear a tie, and Kodak said you had to wear a tie, if you had a special job for Kodak, nowhere else in the community could use you. That when Kodak told you that you had to wear a tie, that would be the very same as the government saying that you had to wear a tie and they would punish you for it.
You're saying that is the same?
It's the same. In one case, the government would say, we'll fine you or put you in jail. And in the other case, Kodak is saying, we will take away all your livelihood and send you out to no job whatsoever in the community. And I would say that would be fraud. Well, I think the government is bad, but it would should not be.
I can make those same types of restrictions on my property. I could, on my one parcel of land, I'm not a monopolist like Kodak, I could, under libertarian rule, argue that anybody who walks into my house has to wear a tie. And if they don't,
Well, I
leave.
guess that's the whole premise, that
So I do have the
it's
right.
possible for someone to be as tyrannical as the government, and I think you will overlook that.
But would you restrict his right
Would you respect my right to say, I require a tie on my property?
I mean, you wouldn't restrict his right to let any.
I'm only using Alan's analogy of
Okay, well, no, that's, you say no.
Answer John's-
You would not
answer
restrict,
John's question.
I'm on her side.
I will answer John's question after Alan answers my question.
Yeah.
Well, I've said that to me it's a totally different thing.
Well,
I understand that because it may be terribly inconvenient to lose your job, personally inconvenient, that's not nice, and I think that that's unreasonable of Kodak, let's say, to make that regulation. But on the other hand, I think it is their right to do so, because I don't think that anyone has a right to force someone to employ them.
Okay,
Any more than an employer has a right to force an employee to work for them.
but
It's voluntary, and John's question was right on the spot. If he has a rule that you have to wear a necktie in his house, and you very badly want to go into his house, but you don't have a necktie on, is that his right to make that rule in his house? Do you grant him that right?
He's got that rule in the restaurant.
Well, let's talk about his house. Do you grant him that right in his house to require that anybody going in his house wear a necktie?
in most cases, I would grant him that right.
Now,
But-
if he starts a business, and I start a company called IBM, and I say to my salesman, you must wear a dark suit, white shirt, and tie, or otherwise you don't work for me.
But
In
I
his
think-
house,
Wait a minute,
in my house.
Yeah.
The black folks got shipped to Africa behind that same fundamental train of thought.
That's right.
That this is our country, that this is our rule, and that if you don't abide by my house rules, you must leave. Now, what are you talking about?
See, well, the whole idea of this country being a collectively owned piece of property is totally unlibertarian. My house is on my property, and I can set the rules of the game, whether anybody likes it or not.
But I think you're really losing a lot of the power of your basic philosophy by making that particular distinction. And it goes back to the question that he asked me a little while ago about the structural issue. And I could grant you all the arguments you're making about the individuals involved. And in fact, I relaxed a great deal when he said that it was perfectly all right to organize an institution on the other side of that issue and force Kodak to let you wear a tie. That's what he said.
Economically.
Boycotts.
You went beyond that.
No.
You went on to picketing, and you went on to burning effigies, and you went on to organizing political action.
That's not force.
That's not force.
It's coming in with a gun and saying, if you fire this guy because he's not wearing a tie, you go to jail. That's
Okay,
force.
so your position is that, first of all, I don't think that makes any difference to the argument I was making, but let me just take it for a minute because it's rather interesting. Your position is that as long as we have a jungle that isn't organized by the government, it's all right.
As long as
Well, we got a bunch of people who are monopolists are sitting around saying, we're gonna take away your livelihood by making rules that say we have the right to do that and we're gonna do it. We say, all right, we'll fix your ass. We're gonna get a group here that's got as much power as you do, and we're gonna stomp all over the place until you stop making us do those bad things.
So maybe the problem we're running into.
You're saying that's all right?
Maybe the problem we're running into is what's causing monopoly.
Pardon?
I think, but the central issue, I think, goes back to the cocoa argument, is why do certain businesses have the rights to make these kinds of rules, and why is there no competition?
First of all, we don't have any disagreement at all where you are going to trace it back to being government action that created the monopoly. So on that issue, you're saying the difference now is that Kodak grew up without any government help. Therefore, it gets to be treated differently than all the other concentrated power centers that grew up without help. And I'm saying there's a structural problem with that. The structural problem is that there is a force out there which by its very being is going to be drawn eventually into using force and fraud. It's eventually going to do that. That's the argument I'm making.
When they do, we're against it.
Yeah, and you're saying when they do, you're against that. And what I'm saying to you is, and the argument I was making is, that rather than look at the labor person, the necktie person, I think it's important to look at the consumer as the actual countervailing structural force to that, and without ever invading with force or fraud anything that monopolist is doing, construct a power center on the other side that is able, on the other side of the point of purchase, that is able to create a situation where the ability to go into force and fraud doesn't exist. Well, that's instead of waiting until some terrible thing happens and then have building bonfires and burning effigies and running up and down and picketing and so forth. Start now consciously constructing.
Consumer boycott.
Well, you don't even if you do it early enough, you don't have to boycott. If you do it early enough, you start your intermediate institutions on the
Anybody's concerned can start anytime that they want.
Well, I thought you guys were going to try to present a political philosophy to America.
We are.
Okay, I'm saying when you want to present your political philosophy, here's a piece that I think is going to help you. Put it in there.
Yeah, but we are concerned with the means that you use. We're saying that it is not all.
No, wait a
right to
minute. You're just
initiate
shifting
force.
the argument.
We're not all right
You're
to
just shifting the
initiate force,
argument.
but
No, you're shifting the argument.
We
You
can't
said
boycott
anybody
the
can do
post
it.
stuff. And the problem we're running into are practical problems of still, we would love to be able to boycott the post office and use Pat Brennan. They put her out of business. We would love, we would like to be able to.
We're on a different discussion now.
Okay. Well, looking at the postal monopoly, which is to us a monopoly that's given granted by government power, just as any other monopoly, a lot of the monopolies in society. We can't shop the competition. And so for us to organize a group and say, let's all boycott the local power company or the local
No, I
telephone
wasn't saying
company.
boycott. I was going back to your Standard & Poor's example. I was saying constructing intermediate institutions on the consumption side of the point of purchase that begin to tighten up the consumption side so that it is able to in fact function as a structure that inhibits the ability of the production side to slip into fraud and force. That's all I'm arguing. It's not a problem.
What can we do against the telephone
Who's we?
company?
What do you mean by we?
The consumer group that we formed.
The telephone company? Oh, there are a lot of things you can do there. I mean, they're already doing it. The consumer movement's already got a whole batch of things.
Can I go to an Ogden telephone?
You don't, okay, now, you see, the thing is that in the telephone company, the perfect example, and I think it's one that is important to follow this philosophy out a little
What
bit.
telephone company can I go to?
Well, there are other alternatives. When you're dealing with concentrated power, what you may want to do is say, let's change the shape of the control of that. Okay, so the institutional framework, first of all, there are 1,500 phone companies. I don't know if you can find one, but There are 5,000 communities in this town that have competing utilities. You could easily go and try to build that. But with who? Well,
We tried it with the post office here, it doesn't work.
There is no
I want to tell you that right now there is major consumer movement in the telecommunications area, developing all kinds of things. MCI, for example, is a nationwide competing institution. Sprint is a nationwide competing institution. I will tell you right now that by the year 2000, it's 50-50 whether AT&T will exist. Now, all I just want, please don't throw at me things like, tell me what phone company we're going to compete with, because there's a whole big power shift going on. All I'm suggesting is that from the point of view of the philosophy that you're putting out, the politics that you're putting out, there is an economic corollary that if you add it to what you're talking about, makes it a much more powerful set of arguments. That's all.
No argument about that. But we have essentially destroyed in this country the very things which you are advocating, consumer suspicion, consumer distrust of outsiders, of consumer groups. Consumers Union has managed to hold out pretty well for those few people who use it. And we have instilled in the consumer over the last 80 years a sense of government is protecting me from all of these things.
Yeah, and I want to bring all those
former
former things back. I mean, that's what I'm
we
after.
agree. We
Yeah,
agree
and-
that these private sector groups, Consumers Union is a good example. Good housekeeping seal isn't all that good.
It's not this.
Underwriters Laboratory is another.
Is good in some sense.
That have managed to survive through this. And had it not been, we think, for the government competition in the consumer protection field, or at least apparent competition.
Yeah, you have to remember that what I'm saying, I agree with everything you said. I want to bring back all that first list that you mentioned, and I want to get rid of all those second things that you mentioned. And I agree with you 100%. There is this one small anomaly, which is that I think that government intervention came at the behest of people in the private sector.
Yeah, we agree. We all agree with that.
Okay, so
That's why we have
And one solution that's developed is the subterranean economy.
that's right.
I mean, that's a lot of,
And the IRS is trying to get it.
yeah, I mean, a lot of us don't hire the licensed electrician to come into our house to put in the
Oh,
plug.
it's even worse than that, or even better than that, however you want to look at it. I mean, there are people bartering right now on all kinds of things. The IRS is now trying to tax that. And those are things that really, I think those are consumer issues. You see, what I'm arguing about, what I'm saying, what I'm urging, what I'm asking, is here is a small group of people in a neighborhood, 20 people, and they work out a barter system. I'll do a daycare, you do the electrical work, you do car repair, and they work it out, and they barter it in the neighborhood. And the IRS is now coming in and wanting to tax them, those transactions. And that's right.
What mechanism are you going to use to accomplish that? See, that's what we're concerned.
Well, let me give you an example of a mechanism, which I mentioned a little bit to Mary Ellen at dinner, just because I've used it a lot in speeches, and see how you react to this. Some retailer, supermarket chain or a drugstore chain or whatever, makes an agreement with a consumer group, so freestanding, self-appointed consumer group, that it will create a situation in its stores so that individual consumers going through that store can contribute a penny to every $10 for every $10 they spend to that freestanding consumer group that created itself for the purpose of having them articulate to the store their views on what it is that they think should be done. And there'll be in the contract, there'll be a way of collecting those views and electing the people that are going to be the spokespeople. How does that strike you?
No problem.
Right. That is the paradigm that I'm trying to use, and a lot of other people in the consumer movement are trying to use. Contract and voluntary, both of those things.
As long as it's voluntary, it's fine with us.
You don't have to.
How do you know it doesn't get taken out?
No, when you get your cash register, when you're at the cash register, they ask you want to contribute a penny. And then, I mean, how do you know it is, and how do you know they didn't charge you a penny more for something else? I mean, you're going to have to, you have to observe.
Or you might shop at a store that doesn't have one of those
It's
groups.
voluntary.
And if you're worried about it, go to a store that doesn't have one of those.
That's the solution that we would.
That would be a libertarian solution.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I think it was very good.
This concludes the program. Please fast forward the cassette to the end so that it will be ready to listen to again.